This is the Jeff Rubin Show. I'm Jeff Rubin, and if you've been listening to the show or have just generally been around me while I'm rambling for a while now, you know just how excited I am for the upcoming release of Arkham City, the new Batman game, which is why today we are going to be talking to Dr. Will Brooker, a man who wrote his PhD thesis on Batman. Thanks for joining us, Will.
No problem. It's a pleasure.
You know, I never got a PhD. Believe it or not, you don't need one to do this. So I don't totally understand the process. Surely there was someone along the way that you had to go to and say, just so you know, I'm going to be writing my thesis on Batman.
Yeah, there sure is. There's quite a lot of framework and checks and balances. My PhD was just as rigorous as someone doing a PhD on something more traditional. There's a lot of quality standards in place. So what happens is you have to find yourself a supervisor who is an expert in the area you want to study yourself. They have to agree to supervise you for 3 years full-time or 5 up to 7 years part-time.
Wait, who did you find that was an expert in Batman?
All right, we'll go back in time, yeah? Go back, way back in time.
Yeah, I want to talk about this whole process of actually getting this thesis.
You want to talk about the whole process?
Sure.
Well, if you go back to the 1970s when I first watched Batman. No, we'll go back... I did an MA in the early 1990s, and after that, I got a taste for... That was me going back into academia. I took a bit of a break. And I got a taste for scholarship again, and I thought, I'm really enjoying this. And I thought, well, I never thought of doing a PhD, but, maybe I am clever enough to do it, all right? So then you have to come up with an original topic you think you can live with for at least 3 years. My topic was going to build on my MA, and it was going to be about masculinity in movies and popular culture of the 90s. So just bear with me here. This is all the backstory.
Sure.
I was going to write about stuff like... You remember around the time it was things like Basic Instinct, films with Michael Douglas and Sharon Stone and so on, that kind of masculinity.
Yeah, like the Joe Esther Harris kind of vibe.
Yeah, they weren't very good movies, actually, with hindsight, so it's pretty good that I abandoned that.
But they were popular movies.
Yeah, they were popular. I think they're probably best forgotten. I was going to have at least one chapter on masculinity in Tim Burton movies, yeah? There's going to be things like Edward Scissorhands. And I thought, well, I'm going to include a bit of Batman and Batman Returns in there. And as it went on, and I was taking notes, I found the thing I was taking most pleasure in was like the bit on Batman. I was thinking, I can't wait to write this chapter on Batman. I can't believe it's going to be so much fun to actually be doing a PhD and write about Batman. I mean, what a kick that's going to be. Until I realized that was the thing I really wanted to do. And so I took that big jump and made the whole thing. I thought, the thing I really want to write about is this one chapter on Batman, so I'm going to expand that chapter to the entire thing.
You were already writing about Basic Instinct. Was it that much more exciting to be
you're right.
Oh, you know what's even better than that? Batman! Well, that's the only way to improve on that.
Yeah, you're right. I was setting a low quality threshold in the first place.
In the early 90s, Basic Instinct and Batman were the number 1 and 2 favorite topics of 13-year-olds.
Yeah, those are the sex symbols of what a man should be, I think, in the early 90s, yeah. So one day I got hold of this book, edited by Roberta Pearson and William Uricchio, The Many Lives of the Batman, and this book kind of opened a door for me, really changed my life. It's a collection of academic essays about Batman from, really the 30s until Tim Burton's films. And this suddenly made me feel and made me realize you can actually write about this stuff academically. People with proper academic careers have published a book about the stuff that I love. And around the same time, I heard on the academic grapevine that Roberta Pearson had moved from New York to Cardiff University. So I sent a PhD proposal to her, and one day I got home and heard on my telephone answering machine the message that she loved my proposal, would like me to come up to Cardiff for an interview, and would like to supervise me, and they were going to give me a scholarship for the next 3 years. So that summer, I upped the sticks and moved to Cardiff, and so the story began.
Along the way, did you meet anyone? Surely someone that you had to pitch this to must have been like, come on, Batman, why don't you write a real essay?
I did then, and I do now. The media picked up the story in around 1999, just not finishing it, and I agreed to do to talk to journalists about it. So I did some television, went in a few talk shows. I met Adam West, actually, which was sat on the same. Sat on the same sofa as Adam West. Yeah, that was cool. The tone of these interviews was pretty much incredulous mockery. It's like, how could you get away with doing this? Are we somehow, is the taxpayer funding you to do this sort of thing that just sounds like fun and just reading a ton of comics?
How are the taxpayers funding it? Maybe I don't totally understand how academia works.
Yeah, I think it's just a general... do you know what I think it is? It's people, frankly, people understandably jealous, all right, that I had the idea and got away with writing about something I actually love that is fun to a lot of people and taking it seriously and doing it for work. And I think a lot of people feel a sort of resentment that their work is something they don't enjoy and their fun is something they do after work, which for me is something I do my fun for work. They overlap.
Is it taxpayer funded in any type of form?
Maybe in some indirect way. I'm not sure how things were funded back in the 1990s. I was on a scholarship for 3 years at Cardiff University. As a taxpayer now, I think I've probably paid it all off. You know, I've been paying taxes for the last 15 years, so, you know, I think it's all evened out in the end.
As a taxpayer, I want to push for more programs to study Batman.
I'm now supervising PhD on Superman, and another one on the concept of the reboot in movies and comics. So, you know, I've got my own sidekicks now. I'm bringing up a new generation of comic book scholars. Yeah, I'm all for it, you know. I enjoyed what I did, and now I'm trying to help other people to do it.
You mentioned that writing a paper on Batman is just as much work as writing a paper on, you know, something more traditional like the Iliad or what have you.
Yep. Yes, it is.
Is that why is that? Is it because there's just so much more Batman? There's only one book, or I don't know how many books there are. The Iliad. I guess there's two. There's the Odyssey and the Iliad, right?
Well, say compare it to Shakespeare or something.
Yeah,
right?
but there's essentially an infinite amount of Batman out there, which is a comforting thought. But you couldn't read it all if you tried.
Yeah, but it's not about when you're writing a book on Shakespeare or something. The challenge isn't can you read every word that Shakespeare ever wrote. And the same with Batman. It's not like a pop quiz where, you know, someone's going to ask you the detail of something that happened in 1943.
When the Calendar Man was fighting Batman in issue 542. That, but, you know, that's not what this is about?
No, the thing is, in academia, all right, I know it sounds strange to some people, but the kind of same framework is there when you're studying comics as it is when you're studying traditional literature. You're still doing the same kind, you're still applying the same kind of theory, just a different kind of material. And you still have to study things as closely, not just have a sense of the whole thing and the history, but you have to analyze individual things closely. And you bring the same theory as you would to something like Dickens or Shakespeare or Homer, but you're just applying it to popular texts. It's really literary theory and film theory, but rather than applying it to things that are traditionally acceptable, you apply it to things that are often thought of as popular, even trashy culture. But you're doing it with the same rigor as you would something which is more traditionally respected.
But because there's so much Batman out there, I mean, it's been published continuously for, 75 years? And
it's been done since 1939, so...
Plus, you know, the TV shows and the movies. How do you, when you say, I'm writing about Batman, there's so many Batman, which Batman are you writing about?
That's a very good question, all right. Personally,
I'd love it if the answer was just 60s Adams West Batman, and I was like, oh, okay, and that was the rest of what we talk about.
Different fans are going to disagree, right? And I respect different fans who have a favorite Batman. And I do have a favorite Batman. I can talk about that later on. But the way I regard Batman is Batman as a concept, as a character, is a composite. He's like a mosaic. Batman is everything that Batman has ever been. All right, you might not like the 60s Batman or the 1939 Batman, or even the Joel Schumacher Batman, but without that, the character would not be the kind of rich, multifaceted, multidimensional, complex, and interesting figure that he is. If Batman had carried on the same as he was in 1939, I don't think he would have continued. But secondly, if he had, it'd be a very kind of flat, pulpy, gothic character. So to me, Batman is interesting because he's so many contradictory things. He's a very, very complex figure. And though we have our own preferences and favourite Batman, the whole concept to me is everything that he's ever been. Every new Batman story to me builds into that whole. I think we have to accept Batman in all his different facets.
When you say he's a complex figure and that there's these conflicting aspects to him, are you saying within Batman the character's mind or over all these different portrayals of Batman?
Well, that's another very good question.
Ooh, I'm doing good.
Yeah, you are. These are great questions, yeah. Generally, people tend to write Batman as one aspect, but Grant Morrison recently in his comics on the mainstream Batman title since I think 2005 took this interesting step of saying, okay, let's try and a thought experiment where every Batman comic is something that happened to the same guy. So let's try and figure out a way that the 1950s science fiction and the 1960s camp and the 1930s gothic and the 1970s streetwise Batman all happened to this same guy in an incredible, compressed lifetime. So he made the 1950s stuff, thought experiments where Batman had gone into kind of, compression chambers and stuff and taking hallucinogenic drugs, scientific drugs, that altered his mind, and so he had these flashbacks. And so the campy stuff happened. It was just a kind of fashion, the way Warhol on the Factory was a fashion. It was a fashion in Gotham. I think that's a very interesting take. It's a lot harder to do that, to say, okay, let's look at Batman and think, how could that stuff all happen to the same guy within 10 years or something, 10 really action-packed years? But most people, I think, say, well, I'm going to write the dark Batman or the campy Batman, and they pretend he's just that one guy. But I think what Morrison did, it's a lot more difficult, a lot more challenging.
As an academic, you guys must love Grant Morrison. Have you read his other stuff? Because there's always some sort of meta aspect where Grant Morrison is a character in the story. And I love his writing, but there's a lot to chew on there in academia, I imagine.
Yeah, I've read Morrison stuff since around 86, I think, when he started writing for 2000 AD. So I'm a long-term Morrison fan. And I think he offers, I mean, he's certainly not to everyone's taste. I know that some people feel that his storytelling is kind of too fragmented, and I think myself things like Final Crisis didn't fully come off. You know, it's not really easy-going storytelling, and sometimes it's very much kind of like watching an advert break. You get kind of real short bursts of stuff which doesn't all add up into something coherent. But he's a very imaginative and challenging writer, and he really tries difficult things. And you're right, sometimes he puts himself into the text, and he tries different kind of styles. So for an academic, I think there's a lot to get your teeth into with Morrison, yeah. But I do like a lot of different styles of Batman. I mean, personally, I really like Miller's Year One and Dark Knight Returns. And they're not trying to be so clever, intelligent. Those are just great stories.
I think that when you talk about the best comics ever, and I mean like almost in a Citizen Kane AFI top 100 list, I think the list for most people generally goes number 1, Watchmen, number 2, Dark Knight. Don't you think?
Well, Moore, again, is a bit like Morrison, isn't he? He's a very clever guy.
Oh, sure, yeah. He's talking about a lot going on.
Yeah, sometimes people might say he's trying to be too clever and doesn't come off. So, you know, sometimes the experiments don't fully all add up.
But isn't that the fun of experiments? You know, if they always work, then.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I really admire those guys. But I mean, I wouldn't want to read just that kind of thing. You know, just like with Batman,
right,
I like a variety. You know, I like simpler action-packed character-based stories, and I like stories playing around with the whole nature of storytelling. You know, Morrison often has characters looking out at the reader and you know, aware that they're in a comic and things like that, and aware they're in some kind of paper universe and we're their gods. Now, I don't think you want to read that every time you pick up a comic book. That's kind of like, you know, the meat, and sometimes you want a Sunday or McDonald's or something, you know, as well as your big steak, your complicated steak.
So I get that you don't have to read the entire printed history of Batman to get all of that, but how much Batman did you read?
That's a good question. I like these questions. That's the third good question.
Yes.
All right, you should win a prize.
Yes.
What happened is,
Ding.
I was very lucky. Yeah, you win a prize there, that prize. I was very lucky in the 1990s, and I don't think this would happen now, but I went to stay at DC Comics for 2 weeks in about 98, I think. They were very, very kind to me. I met Denny O'Neil and their librarian, Alan Asherman. Let me come into the library every day. When I say I lived there, I lived nearby, but I spent all day there. I spent all day in their archive, and I read things which most mortal men never see. I actually read pretty much, I think, you know, I read pretty much every Batman comic book from 1939 until about the 70s, I think. The reason is that the 70s were easier to get hold of and collected editions there. So I've read more Batman than most people, and that's thanks to the DC Comics. It was very, very hospitable to me back then.
I actually interned at DC Comics. Were you at the one in New York, in Midtown?
Yeah. Yes, it was. It was on Broadway, I think, yeah.
I guess they didn't let the interns in there. I never saw the library.
Yeah.
What was the library like?
Well, it was just like, you know, just like what you dream of, really. It was like entering the Batcave or something, you know, this huge arc. It was like the thing at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark where they store all the stuff, you know.
That's in the office?
It's not. It's a gigantic office. Yeah, it's in the offices of DC, yeah.
That's crazy. I spent a whole summer there, and they just, like, didn't show me that part.
Yeah, they didn't let you in, man. It's not like a big hangar. It was like, as I remember it, maybe it's become larger in my mind, but a big library which is just full of genuine old archive comic books.
Like single issues, not reprinted trade paperbacks, like just the old Batman.
Well, they had all the trade paperbacks too, and I think they were in binders. Another great thing is I could see next month's comic books. They were just sitting there in boxes, and the librarian said, you know, just take one. You know, so I had, you know, I could look at Superman for All Seasons came out that summer.
It's like a nerdy version of Back to the Future too.
tell you what it was like. It was like being in Willy Wonka's chocolate factory for Batman.
I mean, you said you're writing about Superman now. Why Batman specifically? Why not Green
No, I'm not
Lantern?
writing on Superman. No,
Oh,
no.
I'm sorry, you're supervisor.
My little sidekick is writing about Superman.
Sorry.
I wouldn't write about Superman. Superman is not interesting enough for me.
What makes Batman more interesting than Superman?
I think anyone who's listening to this who knows Batman and Superman will know that I'm right and will agree. I would be very surprised if anyone thinks that Superman is more interesting than Batman. Well, as a character, Batman is more interesting because, he's not a god, but he walks with gods. Batman is a mortal man, just a normal guy, a rich man, who's trained himself up since his parents were killed to the absolute pinnacle of physical strength and agility and intellectual power. So he's a good model for someone doing a PhD. He's an intellect as well. He's not just a muscular guy. And because of that, he can hold his own with Flash, the fastest guy alive, with Superman, who's like an alien, Wonder Woman, an Amazonian, Green Lantern, who's got the most powerful weapon in the universe, and Batman can face off against these people and even face them down. So as a character, I think he's an amazing figure of what humanity can do. He was like, in the stories of, the Greek gods and so on, as if a mortal could stand up to Zeus. But in terms of publishing and kind of Batman as a character over time, Batman has gone through more changes than any other superhero, I think.
Yeah, that's what struck me when you said that before.
Yeah.
Superman is more or less the same. It's very homogenous from beginning to end.
Pretty much. Superman gets a new haircut and gets a mullet and he goes like electronic blue for 2 years and they dump that and he dies and he comes back straight away. I mean, but Superman is basically a good guy. Superman is basically the big blue Boy Scout, and he's been pretty much that since, about 1940. For a couple of years, since 38, he was a more interesting social reformer kind of guy who took on landlords, slum landlords. And to be fair, Morrison, I think, is trying to do that now in the new Action comics that came out last month, returning Superman to perhaps a more political, radical figure. But mostly he's just, he's kind of just to me, he's a pretty bland guy. He's too powerful as well, and he's too good.
What's your take on Hawkman?
Hawkman? I don't think about Hawkman a lot. What is there to say about Hawkman? Hawkman's been through a lot of different incarnations as well.
Yeah, he's someone that's changed completely. Like, he used to be an archaeologist, but now he's an Egyptian god reborn. I forget. I don't know what the deal with Hawkman is.
Yeah, I know someone who's an Egyptologist, actually, who's a specialist on Hawkman. I'm afraid...
You guys are like your own Justice League.
Yeah. Yeah, we're like a kind of Justice League of geeks, yeah. I'm going to train up enough people that I've got a kind of gang, a kind of Justice League International. So we'll have someone who's an expert on each superhero, I think. But Hawkman falls outside my expertise, yeah. I'm aware of him, obviously, Kato Hall. And you're right, he's now an Egyptian god or something, and previously he was Carter Hall, but I haven't followed his adventures closely enough to comment.
What did you, by digging in for 3 years, what did you learn?
Yeah.
What is... I don't know, totally know how to phrase it, but what is like the thesis? What is the thesis of your thesis?
Okay, you've got to bear in mind this was from 96 to 99, so it's way back now.
Batman Forever was out. It was a crazy time.
Can we say the name of the book, Batman Unmasked?
That is the name of your study, and it is published. I went to Amazon, but it looks like it's very expensive because you have to. It's out of print, and it was like it was $55. Is that how much an academic book's supposed to cost?
Oh, it's probably worth that.
I'm not saying it's not, but I thought it was one of those things where it was out of print. Is that not true? It
could be. I mean, I've got a couple of copies on my shelf. Yeah. If anyone is a real fan, I can just send them as a Word document, I guess. If I can mention my new book is coming out in May next year. That's called Hunting the Dark Knight, and that's about Batman over the last 10 years. So that's taking up the story where the last one ended.
It's kind of like part 2. So
yeah,
Batman.
I'm actually thinking I might do one every 10 years.
Oh, that's a cool, interesting idea because Batman changes too. So we're going to talk about all that. But Batman Unmasked is
I'm going to tell you the thesis of the thesis.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just like, look, I know you got a lot of books out. If you could just break it down for me.
I guess the bottom line of what the book is about how one character can survive by changing and by being so many different things that he adapts for different generations, different audiences, and different historical and cultural moments to remain relevant across what was then 60 years. The idea, I guess the bottom line is, if I had to give it a kind of take-home message, Batman has survived by adapting. That would be the summary. But Batman has survived then, it was from 39 until 99, 60 years then, by being kind of gothic hero in 1939, and then a World War II propagandist. And then in the 1950s, there was a lot of controversy about his supposedly gay relationship with Robin.
Wait, what was the... I want to kind of take these one by one. What was the World War propaganda thing in the 50s?
Okay. Interestingly, I was expecting to see more World War II propaganda in the comic books, and I didn't. But there was the first Batman film serial of 1943 was Batman against the villainous Japanese scientist Dr. Dakar. So it was actually very prejudiced against Japanese people at the time, in keeping, of course, with propaganda from that period. The comic books actually didn't have a lot of anti-Japanese or even pro-American propaganda. Batman kept on fighting the Penguin in Gotham City, but the film serial, the first time Batman was on screen in a pretty low-budget and shoddy film, it was pro-American, anti-Japanese World War II propaganda. So that's the 40s.
And I realize I want to go one by one, but I just started in the middle.
Sure.
Let's talk about the origins of Batman. What was it like when it first came out?
Batman first came out, it was kind of, well, Superman had just came out, and my understanding is they were trying to find something to cash in on this super guy. It's very, very hard to know exactly what happened because Bob Kane has passed on. Bob Kane, when he was alive, kind of grabbed all the glory and made out that he did all the work and did all the invention, and Bill Finger and Jerry Robinson, the other two young men who were involved at the time, who were all kind of, I think, young Jewish guys from the Bronx. I'd have to check the autobiography for these details, but he made out that it was pretty much his own creation. So it's hard to tell exactly who was responsible for the Batman, because in the end you just had three old guys arguing about who did what. But Batman was a kind of pulp character, kind of quite crudely drawn, creature of the night who had no qualms against killing people, fought things like zombies, demons, werewolves. There was some adventures in like Eastern Europe, and there was stuff against gangsters in Gotham City, which I think was then called New York. So it was a kind of film noir, German expressionist type comic. In the 50s, Batman started to get a bit kind of crazy and science fiction-y. And what looked like campy elements started to creep in, and that's when there was a controversy in 1954 with Batman accused of, I quote, a wish dream of two homosexuals living together, that some people felt that his relationship with Robin was setting an example of homosexuality to young people. And so that's when they brought in Batgirl and Batwoman to kind of heterosexualize it up.
So you're telling me the dominant theme of Batman for the entire decade of the 50s was that him and Robin could have been a thing?
First half of the decade, yeah.
How does that manifest itself in the text?
I'm not saying that was the dominant. I'm saying people read that into it. How did that manifest itself? Well, I actually read those comics because I thought, well, let's see what there is in it. And I can see how someone could read it in.
I think we were all familiar with, the general details, but are there specific kind of like nod, wink, wink things when you actually get down to reading the 50s comic books?
They kept their costumes on. I mean, it's not like detail like that. These were still kids' comics. But you could, here's the thing. If you read those comic books, you could read it as, here's a guy, an adventurer in a costume who has a young friend, and he cares about him, and he has to keep on rescuing him, and they live in a house, and it's all very innocent, and they have jolly fun. You could also read it, though, about here's a couple who are in love. One of them's 15, one of them's 30 or something. They seem to sleep in beds next to each other. They hang around in their pajamas all the time. And Robin is always weeping over Batman, like worrying about Batman. Robin's often getting tied up. They often have to rescue each other. And there's also a very interesting running theme that there's always the danger they're going to be unmasked, that their secret identities will be revealed. So I can see how someone could have read a kind of metaphor or an allegory for a secret gay relationship into that. It's not kind of obvious, it's not deliberately in the text, but the interesting thing is I think you could read it that way. Or you could read it as just, an adventure for kids.
Whichever is more fun. But isn't that the thing? It doesn't matter if it was intentionally there. Isn't there some sort of philosophy about that? I'm like vaguely recalling high school English now. Yeah,
that's absolutely true. Yeah, that's right. It doesn't matter. If all the artists and writers from the 50s stated unequivocally, no, we had no intention of making anything look gay, that theory would say that doesn't matter about the intention. No. The reading can still be taken from that text. Just to be fair, there was criticism and controversy and there was condemnation of that Batman, but there's also evidence that some young men growing up in the 1950s, this is before there was any kind of gay culture, before Stonewall or anything, actually read those comic books, and that was, they saw people who they thought were like themselves. These were young men who liked other men or other boys, They didn't have any kind of name for it. There was no such name as gay back then. Homosexuals tended to be sent to the doctor for electric shock treatment and so on. So they read Batman comics and they could see something which they identified with and seemed to be a positive representation of two guys together. So it can be read in various ways. And for some people, it actually provided something positive, reassuring.
What happened next?
60s, despite the introduction of Batwoman and Batgirl, the stories kept on being quite campy. They were just kind of heterosexual and campy.
And this is when the TV show comes out.
TV show starts in 66, and what happened there is they took all the kind of campy elements and just amplified them. And that caught onto the then craze of pop art, Lichtenstein and Warhol and so on. And Batman then became extremely popular. It was a very, very fashionable thing to like Batman for a couple of years. Tied in with the whole pop art craze.
Let's talk about Batman in the 70s.
Batman in the 1970s was basically a reaction to Batman in the 60s. It was kind of the anti-camp. That's when Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams took over. And the shine had gone off the campy Batman. It was a trend which lasted a couple of years. Then it got kind of boring and stale. And the Batman of the 1970s was, let's take Batman back to the street. That's when he started getting called the Dark Knight Detective again. Expert martial artist, street fights, socially realist, supposedly based in the real world. The artwork got much more sophisticated and realist, and this was the start of the grittier, darker Batman, what people now call the Bronze Age Batman.
Then in the 80s, that's got to be Frank Miller, right?
That's right. The 80s basically, just like it goes through cycles, just like the 60s kind of took the camp and turned it up to 11. So the 80s took the grittiness and turned it up for, that's right, so you've got Miller's Dark Knight Returns followed by Year One. So in Dark Knight Returns, he was looking at the last days of the Batman. And in Year One, then, looking at the Batman's origins, how Bruce Wayne became the Batman. And that's very kind of dirty, hairy. Again, very kind of political. He's got a figure looking like Reagan in there. It's very much set in the real world. It's much more violent. It's much more realistic. And, I actually really do enjoy those comics. Those are the Batman that turned me back onto comics when I was a teenager, because I'd given up on comic books after I was a kid. And that made me think, comics can actually be something for someone my age again.
I think that's the case with a lot of people. I think especially Dark Knight Returns is credited with, making people recognize that comic books could be more, and just how much you could do in the medium. It's really one of those very rare like Citizen Kane. I hate always using Citizen Kane as an example.
Yeah.
But, it's one of those rare, very, very rare things that really up the level for what you could do in the medium.
It's also a bit like Citizen Kane because most people agree that it was a landmark. Whether you like it or not. It was a turning point. I mean, it's just a huge thing. And Miller's Batman is also a huge thing. It's just this towering figure. Again, like Kane, so that was a good example. He just becomes this massive icon. He's more than a man. He's just a huge symbol. Just this great big guy. And Miller's done some crazy stuff recently. I mean, not everyone likes his all-star Batman and Robin, but I think you can't take away the glory of Dark Knight Returns. I read that recently, because I was writing about it in my most recent book, and it came out in '86. It still stands up. I mean, I was reading it and getting a lot of pleasure out of it.
Are the politics still relevant? More relevant?
Yeah, that's a good question, isn't it? Because another good question.
Yes.
Well, I don't know. I think it is pretty much grounded in 1980s politics. It's kind of quite a Cold War thing. To talk about Batman relevant to today politics, I think we'd have to look at Nolan's Dark Knight movie, which is much more of a post 9/11 Batman.
What about the 90s Batman? Because that's kind of where I start to lose perspective, because that's the one I remember the most.
Yeah, it's the one you remember the most. Wow.
It's kind of when I grew up, so that's like sort of a defining Batman era for me.
That's the Batman I like to forget the most.
Really? Well, what are we talking about here? What's going on in the 90s with Batman?
Oh, I was talking about Joel Schumacher's Batman.
Oh, of course, yeah.
95. And Batman and Robin in 97. I mean, sure. I wasn't talking about the comic books of the time. But I think most people remember the 90s Batman as Val Kilmer and George Clooney looking very uncomfortable. He's kind of sculpted.
Well, here's what I remember 90s Batman being about. The animated series. And we talked about the DC Comics reboot recently. And this came up because for me, the animated series is the defining Batman. That's kind of what when I think of Batman, like the classical interpretation of it, in its most pure form, and it's because it's what I grew up with. For me, it's the animated series.
Okay, I like that Batman too. I do like that Batman. So when you say 90s Batman, I tend to think of it dominated by the very gaudy Dayglow version of Schumacher's movies. But you're right. here's the thing. It's a magical thing. There's lots of different Batmen running around at the same time. The animated series, I've got a lot of time for that. I think that was pretty magnificent. Hit just the right note. It was for kids, but it's kind of, beautiful looking, very stylish. And, I was a young adult then, and I definitely enjoyed it. I used to buy that on video. Yeah, I think that's a very, very good Batman. Again, it stands the test of time, the animated series Batman.
That's kind of what's cool about Batman, is that it doesn't matter whether it's the comic books or a movie. He kind of transcends any medium. He can be in anything, and it can still be the best Batman ever.
And another thing about Batman is, if you don't like one Batman at a time, there's usually another one at the same time. I mean, now, you've got, we're jumping ahead a bit now, we can go back, but you've got Arkham City, the game. Batman is coming out in comic books. You've got Nolan's Batman. There's the cartoon, The Brave and the Bold Batman for kids. So there's lots of different Batman, and you can take your pick about which is your favorite.
What do you think of The Brave and the Bold? Because that's kind of an interesting, they have an interesting take on Batman in that on their show, The Brave and the Bold, it's a Batman cartoon on the Cartoon Network. It's sort of for younger kids than maybe the animated series. But that show, there's not even Bruce Wayne. It's just Batman. And it's just Batman, it's just the adventures without any glimpse into the rest of his life.
Well, I mean, I think that's pitched at an audience younger than me, but I've enjoyed what I've seen of it.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's pretty good.
No, if I was 10, I think I'd really dig it. It's a good introduction to it's a really good introduction to the character, I think, yeah.
What about the last decade of Batman? It's been about Christopher Nolan and this post 9/11 Batman.
Yeah, well, I would say the most important things of Batman in the last decade are probably Morrison taking over the main titles for the last 5 years and doing that thing where he tried to imagine everything that happened to Batman really happened to the same guy. And then Nolan's movies allowing a bigger audience to take the character seriously again, because Schumacher, Schumacher will give him some credit, but I think he spoiled the character's reputation in a lot of people's eyes. He made it a bit ridiculous. I think even the actors involved felt pretty sorry that they took part in the Schumacher films. I think Clooney has gone around apologizing for it.
I've definitely seen that. At the time, Batman Forever came out, and I think we were all so into Jim Carrey that we let Batman Forever slide. We were like, yeah, this is pretty good. And we maybe allowed him to make Batman and Robin. And then when that came out, we were like, no, dude, too far.
Yeah, I think when Arnold comes out, with a freeze is coming and all that sort of, that drove the franchise into the ground.
But now I look back at them, and Batman Forever is marginally better. It's better than Batman and Robin, but it's obviously still terrible.
It is, but this is exactly the time I was doing my PhD, so imagine how I felt, This is partly why I got a lot of hassle over the PhD, because when I actually was studying it, that's when Batman and Batman Forever and then Batman and Robin came out. If I'd started doing it when Nolan's movies came out, I think I would have been given a bit more respect, actually. So I was writing about Batman when some of the worst Batman ever produced was released. Anyway, Nolan's Batman, then, he kind of takes the attitude, what if this guy really was real? How would it work if you've got a millionaire and he wants to become a vigilante? And so he doesn't just get his butler to make an outfit. He orders like 10,000 cowls from Korea or something, so no one's going to notice that shipment coming over. Makes his own batarangs, gets ex-military equipment and sprays it black, and of course gets the Tumbler as the Batmobile, and basically a tank, which again is very much inspired by Dark Knight Returns. So it's a much more realistic.
Dark Knight Returns, the Frank Miller 80s comic book we were just talking about.
Yeah, that's where we first saw the Batmobile as a tank.
And that's the other obvious influence on Dark Knight from all these different Batmen is not 60s campy Batman, unfortunately, but it's Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns and Year One. There's a lot of Year One in there.
It's Year One, and also it's Loeb and Sales, Long Halloween and Dark Victory. Yeah, very much. Yeah, which are all inspired by kind of 1940s film noir. It's a very shadowy kind of milieu, shadowy world. But Dark Knight, the most recent movie, as saying, that's a lot of reviewers saw a political aspect in that, because Joker basically represents terrorism. It's about how do we fight terrorism. And in fighting terrorists, do we have to use terror ourselves? Basically, Batman is a figure whose power, his raison d'etre, his inspiration was striking fear into the hearts of criminals. So Batman, from his very origin onwards, is about making people scared. So if the Joker represents terrorism, the film is kind of asking, how many lines is okay to cross to stop lives being lost at the hands of a terrorist? And Batman at the end, after crossing a few of those lines, has to exile himself and become hunted himself because he's stopped Joker, but at the cost of infringing civil liberties. So we can see there's an awful lot of political aspects to that.
You must have been so excited when The Dark Knight Returns came out, because that's what the movie was called. I always get that wrong.
The movie, yeah, just The Dark Knight. Yeah.
The Dark Knight was the last movie. I always say Dark Knight Returns when I'm talking about it. You must have been so excited when The Dark Knight came out, because this, even in the rich history of Batman, even with all due respect to the animated series, this is a high water mark in Batman.
I wasn't expecting very much because I thought Batman Returns was kind of quite good. I was invited to a preview of Dark Knight Returns because I was asked to do some radio interviews about it. I tell you, that blew me away. I mean, this is the first Batman film I'd ever seen which actually you could take seriously on a level of Godfather or Heat or Serpico or something. I felt this was the first Batman movie you didn't have to apologize for at all. You could just say, this is not just a great Batman movie or a great superhero movie. This is just a great movie. I mean, it was about a guy that dressed up as a bat, but it was about kind of, crime and politics and the city and power. And as I say about terrorism, it was just it wasn't even a superhero adaptation. It was just genuinely a great movie.
And everyone, trust me, we were all excited about it. But as someone who takes Batman probably more seriously than anyone else, which is no small task considering the comic book fans out there, to see someone take it so seriously and nail it so hard, you must have been out of your mind excited.
Well, Batman for me is like a kind of up and down relationship. I mean, I've seen a lot of crappy Batman, and so you have to kind of roll with the punches. I mean, I don't get depressed when most of the Batman comics out there are no good. You just kind of keep reading the ones you like. So, as a long-term Batman fan and scholar, I've learned to live with the bad years and then the good years. So when a good one comes out, it's just a huge relief for me, really. But, when we're in a bad period where I don't like any of the Batman comics on offer, I just go back and read the old comics, But yeah, it did blow my mind. It was like something I'd never seen before, something we could actually take seriously,
Do you still read new Batman comics? Every week you're getting the new single issues?
No, not every week. I do pick and choose. Because again, a lot of the stuff that comes out, because there's so much stuff that comes out, not all of it is to my taste.
Yeah, we talked about this when we did the DC episode. They published like 18 Batman comic books.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's true. You can't read them all. And I mean, look, I've just finished writing a book. When I was writing the book, yes, I took it pretty religiously. I'm actually sitting next to the biggest pile of Batman graphic novels. I must have spent like £500 to £1,000 on that. That's pounds on
I thought you were weighing it.
Yeah, no, pound sterling. Because I hadn't really, after I finished my PhD, I kind of broke up with Batman. I was a bit sick of the character. And I had a period where I had enough of it. But when I started writing the new book, I had to catch up the last 10 years' history. So I bought a lot. And now I've finished that book, I'm in a bit of a period where I'm taking it easy again. So I'm reading the new 52 stuff.
That's what I'm going to say. You get taking it easy. If you're a Batman academic, you got to know what's going on with this DC 52 thing. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I know what you mean. The thing I feel most strongly about is Batgirl there. Not Batman at all, but Batgirl. I'm really not happy with bringing back Batgirl from a wheelchair. I'm sure they thought about this long and hard, but Barbara Gordon was shot in the spine, I think in 1987 in The Killing Joke, and now in September 2011 they've decided, she was in a wheelchair for like a year, and now she's better. And so for 23 years, this was a character, a woman with disabilities who had an important role in the DC universe as Oracle, who was an information specialist, very much ahead of her time in cyberspace and so on. And they've just decided, she was shot in the spine, but she got better. And now she's Batgirl again. So that's the thing I'm most upset about, not Batman.
Why do you think they did that? Because everyone is universally upset about it. Why would they possibly do that? Is it just because they've tried making different Batgirls and none of them really stuck, so to make a Batgirl stick, they have to use Barbara Gordon?
It's pretty hard to say because I disagree with it so strongly. I mean, I think Gail Simone is a good writer, an intelligent person, a feminist, I think. So, I mean, I imagine she thought carefully about this, but I cannot see... I can't really see the benefits in undoing 23 years of history there.
What is going on in Batman now? He has a son. He has a son named Damian. That seems like a major transgression. It seems like through all these shifts, there's certain constants with Batman. He's,
Yeah.
The parents being killed, the self-made man, the Batcave, the Batmobile, and kind of the Bachelor, his life, that he's a loner. But now in this new Batman reboot, and I think right before it, he has a son, and that seems like a major shift.
Yeah. Do you know what? Again, I like what you're saying there. As Dr. Batman, I think you're coming up with some real key points here, because you asked me to summarize my thesis before, and one of the key points in the thesis was Batman changes, but there's always constants, or else he wouldn't be Batman. But you're right. What are those constants? Well, he lives in Gotham City most of the time, dresses as a bat. His name is usually Bruce Wayne, although we saw Dick Grayson playing the role recently. He doesn't have any superpowers. He fights crime. So for it to be a Batman comic, you need a certain kind of template of constants. And it's interesting to think how much can change and that can still be Batman. Now, what we've got now is a return to something we saw last, I would say probably the 60s, the Batman family, which is when you used to have Batmite, Batgirl, Ace the Bat-Hound, and so on. And now we've got the kind of capitalist corporation version of that, Batman Incorporated, where Bruce Wayne is the head of an organization of Batmen and women across the world.
That's one of the comic books, by the way, Batman Incorporated. That's a monthly comic book, yeah.
Now, some people aren't going to like that, and they think Batman's just a loner. But on the other hand, Bruce Wayne is a businessman, and he's decided to fight crime as a businessman. He thinks, crime is a business thing across the world, so I'm going to make a crime-fighting corporation. So it's actually a very modern way of doing it, because after all, Batman is just one man. And throughout the decades, mostly his idea of fighting crime has been beating up muggers in an alleyway in Gotham City, which is much more of a personal vendetta against the people who killed his parents than any attempt to actually wipe out crime. So you could say what he's doing now is more honest. To fight crime, you don't really just run around an alleyway beating up small-time criminals. You've got to tackle things higher up. So perhaps he's growing up there. Perhaps he's growing up and he's getting over the idea that really he just wants to kill his parents' killer over and over again every single night, and thinking, well, I'm a man, I'm a businessman. Perhaps I should actually take a global view of things here.
So you have this very Darwin evolution, Batman has to change to survive vision of Batman. What is the other comparison for that in all of fiction, or is there one? Is it Sherlock Holmes or... Yes,
we could certainly say Sherlock Holmes. You could say Hamlet as well.
They don't change and adapt the way that Batman does. In this way that he's... No. Is there any other comparison in the way that, in his just durability as a character?
That's a good one. I mean, okay, just to elaborate on the Hamlet thing. The play tends to stay the same. The character tends to stay the same. But even if you think of all the different movie versions of Hamlet that we've seen, or Romeo and Juliet, you still get different interpretations of the same Shakespeare play for a different time. And if they didn't adapt, you would never get, a teenage audience to Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet unless he'd radically changed and updated that play. So, Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet of the late 1960s is very, very different from Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet of 95. So things do change there. We get different versions of Shakespeare. We do get different versions of Sherlock Holmes. On a broader level, Jesus has been painted in different ways throughout the years and depicted in different ways. So Batman I see as a kind of, not a religious icon, but a cultural icon. He's kind of like a folk hero, like John Bunyan or something. Someone who is a tale told over and over again by different generations, which changes over time in order to appeal to a new generation. So I think if DC Comics stopped putting out their comics tomorrow, and if Nolan gave up on the final film, people would still talk about Batman and kind of tell stories about Batman. He'd become a kind of like Brer Rabbit or something, a tale around the campfire.
Have you played... I got to talk about the video game. Have you played Arkham Asylum?
I have played it, I played it on the PC, but I've not played all the way through it, no. I've had a look at it.
Do you ever play any other video games, or was it just or did this cross your radar because it's Batman?
Not loads. I must confess, my last console was a PlayStation 2, and I haven't yet bought a PS3, so I have experience, but, I wouldn't define myself as a gamer, no. But, I used to play games a lot in the 1980s, so they're not completely alien to me.
So you heard this game was good, I take it.
Well, I thought I'd better check it out, because,
you didn't even have to hear it was good, you just thought you'd check it out.
Yeah, it's an important, games have become as big as movies. And now a new Batman game is, it's a pretty big thing. It's not just a side thing. That's a lot of people who never read Batman comic books or go and see Nolan's movies are going to know Batman from the game. So to me, games have become pretty big culturally. So I thought it would be would be pretty remiss of me to know nothing about the game. So I played the first few levels of it, and I think it really captures the character very well, because it's about the Batman who's not just a brawler, but whose power comes from being able to hide and jump out and scare people, basically. You know, it captures the idea that he works very, very hard to seem like a sort of wraith, you know, a kind of an urban demon. So he uses his abilities to hide up there in the shadows and jump out and scare people to death. So I really think it was pretty faithful idea of Batman.
I think one thing that made that game so exciting for me is that Batman is a character with a legacy of terrible, terrible video games, because he's a difficult character to adapt to video games, because so many of the things he does, like outsmarting people, aren't your typical, you know, flying through an asteroid field type accomplishment.
No, you know what? That's a very good point. I think games have maybe now reached the level of sophistication that we can properly depict Batman. Because you're right, that's the thing. He's like in the top 10 of martial artists in the world or something. But he's also a great mind. He's a detective. And in previous video games of previous, you know, generations, I guess we could have like text adventure Batman, but it would be pretty hard to capture the combination of smarts and brutality and physical strength that goes to make up the character. So yeah, I think perhaps we had to wait until this current generation of consoles and PCs before we could actually capture all the complexity of Batman in the game.
And it's interesting to see the video game's place in this universe of Batman, because it uses the writer and the voices from the animated series, which, if you couldn't tell, I couldn't be happier about. You know, they have Kevin Conroy, Mark Hamill. That buys them a lot for me.
That's right. And Arlene Sorkin, I think, isn't it? As Harley Quinn.
She does do Harley Quinn. A character who was created from the animated series, not the comic books, and she kind of made the leap. She was so well loved in the animated series that she appears in the comic books now, and they redesigned her, which I'm not crazy about, to like kind of this slutty Juggalette type look. But then now that look is the main look of her in the DC relaunch.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, they've redesigned Harley Quinn to have more of that video game kind of look.
That's an interesting thing. And, I mean, that goes back to my point that, you know, sometimes stuff's going to happen that you're not happy with, and you just have to wait it out until it changes back. But, yeah, it's very interesting the way. Like I said, games are now very big. And these things, it's not like you've got the comic book and the movies and the games are a spin-off. They all exist in a kind of matrix where they're all sort of dependent on each other. As you say, the animated series created Harley Quinn, and also I think reshaped the Mr. Freeze's backstory.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, Harley
I think
Quinn,
he wasn't taking that seriously, but as I understand it, before the animated series, like it was kind of a goofy thing, and then the animated series is what gave him that angle of his wife is cryogenically frozen, he's trying to save her.
Heart of Ice, I think it was called, exactly, the sad thing about his wife, That then crossed over back into the mainstream DC universe. As you say, you've got most of the key voice talent from the animated series in the game, but they don't have the same visual appearance. But Batman of the game looks pretty similar to the Batman of the comic books now. He's very kind of armored, very military-looking, kind of, you know, a one-man army. So, yeah, these things really inform each other. And it's an interesting situation. It's what academics call transmedia, where it's not like you've got your main thing, which is the comic book, and then the secondary text. They're all kind of equal, and they talk to each other, and they influence each other. In a recent Batman comic book, we saw even... I can't remember the guy's name. The Batman Beyond. I'm sure someone listening.
Terry McGinnis?
McGinnis, right? Yeah.
I love Batman Beyond, too. I think
there you
Batman
go.
Beyond
Terry McGinnis from Batman Beyond had a cameo in a mainstream Batman comic book, so he's now officially part of Batman's future continuity. So, you know, these things all exist in a dialogue.
What do you think of Batman Beyond? Because that sounds terrible.
I've seen some of it,
It sounds like a terrible idea. Like when they, you know, if you told me that they made a cartoon about Batman in the future and he's got a new teenage sidekick that becomes, that sounds like a terrible idea, but that show was pretty awesome.
Yeah, it sounds like Scooby and Scrappy-Doo or something. But I kind of like the idea of letting Bruce Wayne get older, and I think it makes a lot of sense as he gets older. This is like in the comic book miniseries now, graphic novel Kingdom Come. As Batman gets older, he becomes a guy who can't walk around and fight for himself so much, but he kind of sits in a command center, you know, and he gives orders to other fitter people, younger people, or just to robot bats or something. So I kind of like the way that it's letting Bruce Wayne become, you know, 60 years old, a grey-haired old guy. He's a smart old guy, but he's smart enough to know he can't keep on running around, so he has to delegate the job to other people. And that's why I like Batman Incorporated, you know. He's a guy, he's a successful businessman. As he gets older, what he's going to do is start passing on the business to young guys, and he's going to sit there running it all. So I think that's fine. That's a good concept. I like the idea of age in Batman.
I almost feel bad for Bruce Wayne because his job will he never gets to retire. Like, he has to do this pretty much forever.
Well, you shouldn't feel sorry for him because, I mean, he created the job. He wants to do it forever. That's his life, really. He didn't have much romantic relationships in his life. I think his business in Wayne Tech is mostly geared towards as a front for his Batman activities. You know, Batman is his life, and in some comic books, Bruce Wayne is the pretend guy, and Batman is the real guy.
I'm really excited about the reason I was thinking who could I talk to about Batman is because the sequel to Arkham Asylum, Arkham City, is coming out.
Yeah.
Are you going to be playing that?
I think I am going to play that, actually. I think I might have to buy a console just to play it. You know
what's really interesting about that? I think you're going to think is really interesting.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you know yet, because I don't know if you keep up with the video game news. The main villain in that appears to be Hugo Strange.
Yeah, I don't think that's so exciting to me. I prefer Joker, really.
I think the Joker's definitely in it, but Hugo Strange appears to have a prominent role in the game, who is a very obscure, and by obscure I mean he was never on the cartoon or the TV show or any of the movies. He's kind of one of, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe Batman's oldest rogue.
Yeah, that doesn't work so well for me, actually. I mean, I really think the Batman and Joker dynamic is the most interesting. But maybe they feel they used that up in first game. But yeah, Arkham City is very exciting. It's a big kind of open plan. It's a whole city, isn't it?
Yeah,
what do you call it? Sandbox or something.
Yes,
you know, it's not. Whereas Arkham
exactly
Asylum was fairly closed set. It looks incredibly big, incredibly big. You know, you can understand that because I'm a kind of film and cultural studies academic and I have to watch a lot of movies and watch a lot of TV and read a lot of books and comics. It's very hard for me to devote the days that a game requires. Last time I did that was when I won GTA San Andreas. But I'm going to give this game a good shot. It's hard for me to give like days over to immersing myself in the video game world, but I think I'll enjoy that.
What about the upcoming Christopher Nolan movie? How excited are you about that one?
How excited am I? Well, you know, trilogies, the third movie in a trilogy often drops the ball, doesn't it? So,
well, the second movie in the trilogy usually drops the ball, but The Dark Knight came out.
Well,
I see what you're saying. There's Empire Strikes Back and just sequels in general.
Godfather 2. Yeah,
I guess is what I was getting
at. The third movie is often the worst. I guess rather than excited, I am, you know, I just really hope it's going to stay up to the standards of Dark Knight.
You were saying how Dark Knight was the first comic book movie you could ever really take seriously. What's your thoughts on Batman Begins?
I think it's good, but it's not spectacular, basically. I think it's solid, you know. I think it's laying the groundwork for something much, much better in The Dark Knight. I think it's fine. But that, to me, is a good superhero movie, whereas Dark Knight is actually just a great movie, actually. I think it's one of the greatest movies of the decade. But anyway, Dark Knight Rises, yeah, I know a lot of people like Bane, you know, but I never really dug Bane, who's the main villain in this, along with the Catwoman. He's the guy that broke Batman's back. I've never been sold on that character, but I'm prepared to be convinced otherwise on that. Catwoman, I like as a character, actually, and I like Anne Hathaway, so I think that could be interesting. I think Catwoman's relationship with Batman is about as interesting as his relationship with Joker, so I think that's an important dynamic.
What's his relationship with Catwoman like?
Yeah, it's kind of love-hate. With Joker, you know, I'm not saying he kind of loves Joker in a romantic way, but I think he needs Joker. They are really two sides of the same thing. I think Joker wouldn't exist without Batman, and that's why he always, he will never kill him. He never even locks him up very, very solidly. He puts him away, and he knows he's going to get out again because he needs Joker, and Joker needs Batman. And there's been a lot of stories where, you know, their duality is made clear. With Catwoman, it's a bit different because, I mean, he actually does, you know, he fancies the Catwoman. You know, he would like to have a romantic relationship with her, but he can't because she's a criminal. So they have this love-hate thing where he's attracted to her, and sometimes she's kind of on the borderline of good and evil. I mean, she's not a killer, she's a cat burglar. So he could kind of convince her to be on the side of good for a while. So he's very attracted to her, but it troubles him because obviously she does steal things. So, you know, it's another interesting dynamic, which we don't have so much with someone like Two-Face or Mr. Freeze or Scarecrow, because Batman doesn't really have any feelings of affection for them, I don't think. Maybe Two-Face, because he used to be a DA. But, you know, Mr. Freeze and Batman, there's nothing there. It's, you know, it's literally cold. Whereas Batman and Catwoman, that's a hot thing.
This really solidifies Bane's place in the pantheon of Batman villains because this movie is, you know, obviously everyone's going to see it, And Bane has been he's a relatively new character. You talk about like Joker and Catwoman and Penguin. These people have been around since the 40s. Bane was invented in the 90s, and I think now he's going to be, one of the people you associate with Batman.
Yeah, well, you might be happy with that. I mean, other people like me are not so happy with that.
I don't dislike Bane. I think Bane is kind of interesting. There is a cool Batman Beyond where I love when it kind of, that show reached back and acknowledged, Batman's history. And there's a cool Batman Beyond where there's someone being fueled by venom, which is the drug that fuels Bane. So Terry, this new Batman, goes to track down Bane, and he finds him, and it's like this withered old man hooked up to a machine. And I always thought that was kind of interesting that like it led him there.
That's good. Well, look, I like Nolan a lot. I think Nolan's a very, very intelligent guy. Nolan is one of our best new directors. So, if anyone can do a good Bane, it's him. Bane was in one of Schumacher's movies, and pretty bad in that. So.
Yeah, well, but that wasn't really the classic Bane. They used Bane where they could have just used any big, strong guy. Whereas Bane, from his inception in the comics, was as smart as Batman. He was a detective himself.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what the take's going to be a note, but I wouldn't hold the Schumacher depiction of Bane against him, is what I'm saying.
No, I think we could do it. Like I say, we could do with wiping our memories of Schumacher off the map. I think if anyone's going to do a good Bane, it's going to be Nolan. He was never one of my favorite characters in the comic book, but fair enough. I'll keep an open mind on that. Because we can't have Joker again, of course, because Heath Ledger's passing. So,
looking ahead, what do you think is the future of Batman? Is it going to continue forever? When will Batman ever stop?
When will Batman ever stop? Well, in the near future, I'm pretty sure they're planning a Justice League movie and franchise, kind of copying Marvel Studios' Avengers, where there can be lots of different movies about the same characters.
But isn't it so hard to imagine? The Marvel movies...
Green Lantern didn't really take off, though. So.
Right, and the Marvel movies... And my friend Pat and I talked about this in the summer movie episode. The Marvel movies are all like more or less the same type of movie. That you could see them existing together.
Yep.
You can't... It's so insane to imagine the Christopher Nolan... Christian Bale Batman mixing it up with the Ryan Reynolds Green Lantern. They couldn't be from more different movies.
You're right. That's absolutely true. I mean, although they do it in the comic books, an intelligent writer can put them together. No, you're right. It's a big problem in terms of tone. What I think they're going to do there, if they do that, is abandon the Nolan Batman and write a new Batman, a Justice League Batman, who can fit in with their kind of science fiction basis. What's going to happen with Batman in the future? Well, I've always said that as long as I'm alive, Batman is going to be alive because I keep the flame, I keep the faith for Batman, and there's enough fans out there in the world, as you know, who even if there weren't any more Batman comics or movies, Batman is alive in people's minds and hearts. I mean, Batman, as I say, has become a kind of cultural hero, a folk figure. We don't actually need those 10 new Batman comics a month to keep Batman alive, especially with internet and all kind of fan culture. If DC decided, Batman's flopping now, we're going to shut it down, which they nearly did in the mid-'60s before the TV series revived interest, it's not like everyone would suddenly forget about Batman, People would still talk about Batman to their kids and so on. Kids would still dress up in homemade Batman costumes if they weren't any store-bought Batman costumes out there. I think he would actually become something that just belongs more to the people, actually. I think Batman would survive as a folk character.
You almost sound like a character in a Batman comic book. We were talking about if they strike Batman down, he'll become even stronger because the idea of Batman will be carried on by the people. We are all Batman.
Well, that's quite a compliment. Yeah, if I started talking like a character in a Batman comic, that's pretty good for me. That works for me.
Do you think people in 1,000 years, 2,000 years will study Batman? It seems like a major legacy of our culture.
2,000... I think is pushing it. I'm thinking about Shakespeare here.
Yeah.
I can't even say for sure if we'd be studying Shakespeare in 2,000 years. Because Batman isn't actually a religion. If Batman was something like a religion, I would say, because obviously religions do last 1,000 years. Well, you've got the Odyssey and things like that, haven't you? I'd have to think about what precedents are there for stories that have lasted that long. It's possible, but I wouldn't count on it. I think it's possible. It depends on us.
How does it depend on us?
Because it's down to the fans of Batman to keep Batman alive. I mean, even on a very realistic sense, in a pragmatic sense, if people don't keep buying the Batman comic will fold. If people don't buy the Batman game and go and see Nolan's films, they're not going to make any more. But on a broader sense, as I said, it's people like us that keep Batman alive through kind of our stories, through talking about Batman. People pass down Batman from generation to generation. We keep Batman alive, partly because we're Batman's market, but also because we're Batman's fans and Batman lives in us.
What is the name of the book where we can read more about this?
Well, there's Batman Unmasked, which came out in 2000, but I've just finished a new book called Hunting the Dark Knight. Preview copies are out in May, and they're hoping to bring it out in time for Dark Knight Rises, so that'll be around June, July next year. And
I noticed that these are not the only academic texts you've written about these pop culture things. You have a book about Blade Runner.
Yeah, I'm not just, yeah. I know I might sound quite evangelical about Batman, but yeah, I'm interested in quite a lot of stuff, yeah.
Who'd win a fight, Decker or Batman? Probably Batman, right?
Batman would win the fight.
That's what the entire thesis is about, who'd win in a fight.
Yeah, it would be quite a quick book, because Batman would win the fight, obviously. Obviously, Batman would win that fight.
Who could beat up Batman?
Who could beat up Batman?
Luke Skywalker, maybe.
Yeah, Superman on a good day. Superman if he's had his spinach. Yeah, I've written about. There was at one point, I talked about all the hassle I've got for writing about Batman. I thought at one point I was going to, go a bit more respectable, and I wrote a book which is almost exactly the same approach, but it's about Lewis Carroll and Alice in Wonderland. And that, funnily enough, is taken a lot more seriously because it's about kind of, Victorian literature, but it's exactly the same thing. It's about how the meaning of something changes over time. That's what I'm interested in, how something adapts and survives, how something changes over time and remains relevant to a new generation by changing. So yeah, I've written about Star Wars as well, Blade Runner, Alice in Wonderland, things like that, popular culture.
Well, let's catch up again after Arkham City comes out, and definitely after the movie comes out. This was so fun talking to you.
Thank you very much. Well, I had a lot of fun.
And the books are all on Amazon. Is there a website or anything else we can plug?
No, but if anyone wants to email me and talk to me about Batman, I'd be very happy to talk to anyone who's interested. My email is drwillbrooker, one word, @googlemail.com.
That's an amazing pitch. I love. If anyone wants to talk about Batman, just email me.
Yeah, I'm not trying to sell them the thing. I just, I'd like to talk.
I just like talking Batman.
Let's talk about the things we love, yeah. And if anyone wants any advice on getting into an academic career as well, I'm very happy to offer any young scholars any support I can, because I've got a job writing about and studying things I love, and I'd like to encourage other people to study what they love.
Thank you so much for talking about Batman with us.
No problem. Thank you.
Email me if you want to talk about Batman. It just doesn't get any better than that. I double-checked. It is a genuine offer. Take them up on it. I am unspeakably excited about next week's episode. Gonna be our biggest guest yet. I am not quite ready to reveal who it is yet, but I will let you know if you follow me on Twitter @JeffRubinShow, on my Facebook fan page, or on my Tumblr blog, that is jeffrubin.com, where you can also sign up for email alerts about when there are new episodes. Next week, biggest Jeff Rubin show in our brief 4-month history. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you guys then. Bye.